My name is Jaime Stapleton. I'm an Associate Research Fellow at the School of Law, Birkbeck, University of London. I work sometimes as a consultant and sometimes as an academic, so I'm a strange, confused person. And my original training was as an artist, and I taught theory to artists for 10 years. And I don't do that anymore. And I'm currently working on 3 books, one of which is about the intersection of law and cultural theory, one about the intersection of economics and cultural theory, and one about what has happened to the politics of the anti-copyright and copyright reform movement. So the first book is out later this year. It depends what we call the creative industries. I mean, the definition of the creative industries, the concept began in the UK around 1996-97, and it was formulated around copyright. So it was an attempt to gather all the industries together that had something to do with copyright. It's a very vague concept, the creative industries. In fact, in America they're called the copyright industries, which is much more precise, right? And it sometimes merges with the notion of the cultural industries, which is the fixed infrastructure like museums and galleries and money coming in to a country related to tourism and cultural tourism. So there are some attempts to create free cultural models for artists. The biggest difficulty with them is that there is very little money, if you're a small player, in copyright in the first place. So that the creative industries, copyright industries, tend to be dominated by lots of small businesses, tiny micro businesses, and a few large distributors, multinational companies who distribute that content. The power that you have to negotiate contracts is very small, even if you're working with copyright. Working without copyright, it's even harder to make money. But there are some projects such as Open Business, which have tried to look at models for making cultural businesses without using copyright. And to some extent, I would say the art world is not as dependent on copyright as other art forms are, like film and music, have traditionally been much more focused around copyright. The film industry really grew up with copyright as an essential part of its model, whereas visual arts didn't. It existed a long time before copyright and has other ways of thinking about funding. Yeah. I don't think visual art is particularly. Media arts and new media arts particularly have a traditional hostility towards copyright. And there have been many attempts to provoke copyright owners and governments and agencies that promote copyright. The visual arts is a strange instance in a way, because if you think about a book, right, there's no market really for the manuscript of the book. It's totally made for reproduction. Visual arts often, the object is the focus of attention, and the reproduction part is not really that interesting to most people. Yesterday or the day before, a Giacometti sculpture sold for £60 million, which is an insane price. Well, if you're getting that for the object, the reproduction rights are hardly going to be interesting. Having said that, when you're on a very low income, as most artists are, very, very low incomes, tiny earnings from here and there matter much more than they do if you're sort of someone from the estate of Giacometti. So there's a sense in which some artists will say almost any income stream is okay. There's one other thing I think that I should just end with, which is that my general perception is that in the visual arts there's a general kind of hostility to copyright. If you talk to photographers or illustrators who have had to earn their living by selling their work to magazines, most of them have been in unions that for 20 or 30 years have been agitating for the status of author for those photographers and illustrators. So they tend to be very pro-copyright because they have been used to being ripped off by publishers who own the copyright of the work that they do. So I think it very much depends. There is an economic route to this. Artists don't really need copyright in the same way that illustrators and photographers do. And that tends to dominate the way that they see these issues. I think you could almost eliminate copyright from the visual arts, and the visual arts would probably just carry on in the same way as they've always carried on, because there is this product that is sold through these other well-established institutions. The difficulty for free culture is that trying to find those alternative income sources very quickly is very difficult. If you think about the visual arts, they've had like 500 to 1,000 years to develop, you know, a sort of these alternative ways of funding themselves. And if you're talking about media arts, it's much harder. Okay, so that's the dilemma that everybody has. And just on a very final point, I mean, my own position on intellectual property and copyright is I've belonged to a number of organisations that have campaigned for the shrinking of rights. The terms are too long, far, far too long. We're looking at the death of the author plus 70 years in Europe. Terms of around 14 years for most things would be absolutely enough. Most things have no commercial value after even a few years, even if they have commercial value at the beginning. But the vast majority of things in copyright have no commercial value at all. You know, your parents' wedding photographs are in copyright, and there is no real fundamental commercial value for that. And so it is an insane law in that respect. The bigger political questions about monopoly, producers, Microsoft, Hollywood, and all those kind of issues, I think that you can deal with those problems to do with the accumulation of control by shortening copyright terms. But that's no substitute for the real political levers, which are antitrust law, competition law, forcing monopolies apart. To me, Google is probably more dangerous as a monopolist, in terms of our access to knowledge and the way that we search for knowledge, than Hollywood and Microsoft rolled together with the music industries. You know, so how we think, if the issue is really monopoly, it's not just intellectual property monopolies, it's natural monopolies that develop because the product is good. Google has a great product, but that leaves them, because everyone uses it, into a monopoly position. We should be very, very wary of that, just as we should be wary of a large company like Microsoft abusing its market position. So that's the political bit. Okay. All right, thank you.